A topic that pops up among the gaming community on occasion, and one that I sometimes find myself thinking about at random moments, usually in relation to online gaming, is the fear of missing out, typically shortened to FOMO. It describes the uneasy sensation that a person feels when confronted with the thought that they might be uninvolved with or generally ignorant of a major, popular event, experience, or piece of information. Feelings of regret are usually tied to the fear of missing out because no one enjoys the idea of being left in the dark about a special opportunity of some sort that everyone else is receiving. A person experiencing FOMO is also typically afraid of feeling disconnected from what all other people seem to be doing, and that not joining them would be the wrong choice to make. Not everybody, but a lot of people experience varying degrees of FOMO at some point throughout their lives, and if there's one group of individuals who are familiar with it, it's people who play video games. I'm not just talking about how some video games come out and are so ridiculously popular, successful, and critically acclaimed that you would be a fool to not play them too. I'm talking about game design elements within the actual interactive experience made to evoke a feeling of FOMO, in order to force you to commit to the game for a longer period than you may have initially expected. These mechanics and systems manifest themselves in different ways, and are usually stronger in games with a heavy focus on multiplayer, or just staying online in general. The most common tactic is holding periodic, limited-time events. Within the last decade, however, things like battle passes have appeared even for non-live service games, a system where the player spends money for the opportunity to unlock more content, and still has to play regularly to actually acquire it. If you buy a battle pass and stop playing, or even just don't play enough, then your money goes to a complete waste and you're out on skins or weapons that the more dedicated players have obtained. And then you have MMOs. They have limited time events of their own, but where they differ and excel is putting FOMO-evoking systems into the core experience, the things you do every time you log in and play. World of Warcraft, since the very beginning, even before more recent controversies, was notorious for the sprint to endgame content in order to collect endgame gear, because if you lag behind on those raids, you might never catch up until the next expansion comes out. And that goes for almost any other kind of grind an MMO might have. If you don't log in on a day-to-day basis to strike this new content while the iron is hot, you might have trouble getting into it later after activity drops. Every day you don't log in is a day you lose for the next 2 years. Looking back on it now, it's honestly kinda surprising that there was never a heavy backlash to this type of design sooner, as it feels extremely manipulative, because it is. Even worse, some people are more susceptible to this type of manipulation than others, potentially to a compulsive degree. Because big MMOs need big concurrent player counts to pay for upkeep, this constant dangling of the carrot in front of the player's face was always taken as an inherent attribute of the MMO genre, a necessary evil to ensure its longevity. But other games have shown that it doesn't really need to be. I know I'm a broken record when it comes to how much I love Final Fantasy XIV, but this is a major area where it shines. It doesn't try to shackle you down by making you follow a never-ending trail of breadcrumbs that lead to nowhere by playing every single day just to guarantee you aren't left in the dust by the more devout players when you inevitably return. It's a game that tells you that if you're not interested in the current content, you can stop your sub and come back later, and it's confident that you will come back eventually, because it knows it's just a good game. And depending on what aspect of the game you actually care about the most, MSQ, raids, trials, field operations, or PvP, catching up could take as little as 1 day. All the important content stays where it is, and everybody is encouraged to play it over and over again for daily bonuses. I would know all this because I go months at a time without playing, and I can still go back to it without breaking a sweat or feeling anxious. It also helps that I know the community is generally pretty patient and helpful regarding stuff I'm behind on. Of course, MMOs and online games in general aren't the only ones who can evoke a sense of FOMO. Single-player games can do it too, often by leading the player into keeping themselves occupied with optional tasks or just plain busy work in order to gain access to more content that may or may not be crucial to their experience. Admittedly, it's not as manipulative or straight-up sinister as some of the methods utilized by their online counterparts. But some single-player games are unflinchingly plain in their desire to keep you playing for as long as possible, and they can do that in a number of ways. I don't want to collect 500 coins scattered around the whole map, but what if the reward is something really useful? I don't enjoy using this weapon, but I have to use it to upgrade it, and what if it gets really powerful later on? I don't think these side quests are very fun, but what if they impact something important in the story? So on and so forth. I'd be willing to bet that the vast majority of people who play games as a primary hobby have had a thought at least similar to these while playing a game before. For some people, it's easily avoidable. You just don't play what you don't find fun. Easy, right? Generally, yes, but not for everyone. I mentioned the word compulsive a minute ago, and that has a lot of importance here, and it leads me to a related topic: completionism. The conversation about video game completionism can be approached from multiple different angles. What does completion truly mean? Is completion required for true mastery of a game's mechanics, or is it bogged down by too much meaningless padding to matter? Is the experience of achieving 100% completion for a specific game different from the experience of simply reaching the end of the story? Those are all different discussions I've seen about completionism, and they might be worth having, but I have one other specific question that I want to go over in this video. Is your approach to completing a game compulsive or not? I want to start off by first touching on a very popular type of engagement mechanic that's been around many years now and has been fairly controversial the entire time: achievements, or trophies if you're primarily a PlayStation gamer. The introduction of achievements has brought into gaming a new kind of player retainment method, a system that offers a digital reward in the form of points proudly displayed on your online profile to signify how dedicated you are to the games you play. It's a game outside of the games, and it's cultivated its own category of dedicated players, the aptly named achievement hunters. Achievement hunting is an extremely niche but hardcore activity where players try to crank up their overall gamer score or trophy count by tearing through various games in the hopes of reaching 100% completion as fast as possible, chasing after the hardest achievements they know of, and maintaining a high rate of 100%ed games. The way they do this can vary, but the opposing ends of the scale are quite different. For example, one player might play through a game at a very normal pace the first time, playing just like the average person would. But once they're done, they can go back and do cleanup on whatever content may be left, and maybe do a second or even third playthrough if necessary. It's a very normal way of doing things, and it's easy to assume that there's still a level of enjoyment being had here. However, on the other end of the scale, there's one player who meticulously researches the game ahead of time and plans the optimal path that will allow them to hit every achievement possible on that first playthrough, with complete disregard to anything else the game has to offer. They don't care about the story or the graphics, and they barely care about the gameplay. Their top priority is getting those achievements, and they will buy and play any mediocre trash heap of a game so long as it has easy achievements. They'll power through a game that they despise because they want the achievement notification to pop up more than they want to delete this garbage from their storage drive. To many of us, this type of achievement hunting sounds downright fucking miserable. It almost defies all reason that anyone would get any semblance of enjoyment out of playing games this way. But here's the thing, it's not always enjoyment. Based solely on things I've seen and experienced, the approach to video game completionism is primarily divided into 4 types, represented by quadrants on the chart you see before you. If you're familiar with the political compass layout, then you know the kind of chart this is. The top two squares will be labeled compulsive, the bottom two as non-compulsive. The left two squares will be labeled as enjoyment, and the right two squares will be labeled as non-enjoyment. With this visualization in mind, let's go over each of the four quadrants individually and discuss what they mean. Oh, and just for the record, I am not a mental health professional of any sort. I am merely giving my personal interpretation of compulsiveness in regard to video game completion, strictly based on the behaviors I've observed or done myself. That's all. And categorizing completionism this way is not necessarily my original concept either. It's something I've seen others do similarly over the years, and I'm merely aggregating what I've learned. Anyway, the first quadrant is compulsive enjoyment completion. Contrary to the inclusion of the word compulsive, you don't actually need any sort of obsessive-compulsive disorder to experience this. It stems only from unbridled enthusiasm that anybody can feel. It's when you love a game so much, it's all you can think about, to the point where you feel like you need to play it. As an example, let's say I am obsessed with Elden Ring. When I'm able to, I'm playing Elden Ring. When I'm not able to, I think about playing Elden Ring. When I have a day to myself, I only eat, sleep, and play Elden Ring. When I play Elden Ring, I'm happy. When I'm not playing Elden Ring, I'm kinda sad. This is compulsive enjoyment. You feel like you need to play it, but only because you love it so much. It's not a burden from your perspective, as you still find enjoyment in it. And this continues until you feel content with everything you've experienced in the game and you're comfortable with finally putting it down. This is compulsive enjoyment. Next is non-compulsive enjoyment, which was more or less already illustrated in my earlier example of the normal completionist. You really like a game and want to complete it, so you chip away at it whenever you have the time to spare, or maybe in the interim between other new games. You don't need to do it though, because you're not necessarily obsessed. You can stop whenever you want, and you might for a little bit, but since you like it, you feel inclined to not fully quit until everything's been done. That's all. This is non-compulsive enjoyment, and I would say it's the category where most people fall into most of the time they try to complete a game. Third is non-compulsive non-enjoyment completion. This one's more annoying than anything. You're simply playing a game you don't like and barely tolerating it enough to finish it and toss it out. Again, since this is non-compulsive, you don't feel like you need to do it. It's entirely your choice and you have complete control over it, but you sure as hell are not having any fun. In fact, completing it in a timely manner might not even be a priority, and you actually look forward to other games taking your attention away from it for a bit. You have it in you to quit, and you just might, if you feel that your freedom is more important than a full achievement list. And the fourth and final quadrant is almost certainly the worst one: compulsive non-enjoyment. For anyone who sits in this spot, it probably feels like hell. Basically, you dislike the game or specific aspects of it, but your compulsive completionism is forbidding you from dropping it. You need to finish it, because if you don't, you'll feel deeply upset and uncomfortable, and you won't be able to focus on another game until this one is done. The mere idea of dropping the game before you've deemed it complete makes you want to freak out. Unlike most people, you are not playing the game to feel enjoyment. You are playing it to avoid anxiety. Or, more generally, you're not playing to get something positive out of it, you're playing to avoid something negative. It's a pretty shitty feeling, having to expose yourself to something negative just to prevent something worse from happening. This is compulsive non-enjoyment. This is why, sometimes, people who throw themselves at a game to the point where they're making spreadsheets about how to play which content and in which order aren't always doing it because it's fun. It might not be, but they're experiencing a compulsion to do it. For that small 10%, 5%, maybe less of players who start a game seeing a bunch of stat and attribute meters they have to fill through gameplay in order to truly complete a game becomes a task they are obligated to do, especially when they're presented in a way, intentionally or not, where someone might feel like they're missing out on something important if they don't do them. That doesn't mean providing a lot of content is a bad thing, not by a long shot. These players are just susceptible to compulsive completionism, and depending on how that huge amount of content is conferred to the player, certain mechanics and systems can turn a game into a mental trap they need to chip their way out of before they can move on to a new one. The best way for games to avoid evoking this feeling is to make a clear, distinct boundary, separating content that is significant to the experience from content that's mostly there for the sake of it, or to create a base formula for the game that makes completion feel more self-driven. Less meters to fill or stats to drive up, and more immediate unlocks that simply open the door for more ways to complete objectives. I used Elden Ring as an example earlier for compulsive enjoyment, though only from the perspective of someone who loves Elden Ring. But imagine, for a moment, if Elden Ring actually was designed to evoke obsessive-compulsive completion out of you. Imagine if you needed to defeat a certain number of bosses in each region of the map to unlock the next region. Imagine if you needed to clear a certain amount of dungeons to unlock a new merchant. Imagine if you needed to reach a certain number of kills before you can even upgrade your weapon to the next tier. So on and so forth. It would turn the game into a mercilessly tedious time sink loaded with meter filling and number boosting. It would transform the game from an experience that you want to put hundreds of hours into to a game that you have to put hundreds of hours into. It would change the dynamic Elden Ring has with its own players completely, and it would be a FOMO-riddled nightmare for people who are susceptible to that kind of manipulation. For some games, dangling a carrot in front of your face that you will never catch, or leading you on with a breadcrumb trail that'll never end, is the only way to squeeze a large amount of playtime hours out of you. Some of them do it more subtly and tastefully than others, I'll admit, to the point where it might not even feel like a chore at all. But I think it's better for everyone if the road to completionism was more defined and self-motivated, so it doesn't feel like a job or an obligation. This concludes my thoughts on video game completionism, compulsion, and the fear of missing out. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.